Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come together and talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we meet a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran collecting mailbox money somewhere, or a frustrated genius scratching out verses on the back of company letterhead, or anywhere in between, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Okay, before we get started today, I'd like to thank everybody for the great feedback we've been getting over the first two episodes. As always, I'm open to suggestions for future guests, so get at me. This last month was a great one on the road. It was a real honor to play some shows with fellow road warrior Langhorne Slim. I wanted to remind you that if you want to hear some alternate takes, some live takes of some of my old songs, you can head over to our YouTube channel where I've started a monthly series called Home Tapes, so check that out. Also on that channel, I've uploaded each podcast episode, the audio there, if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts. So check that out. As always, there's a good chance I'll be heading to your city to play live in the next month. I will be in Columbus, Ohio, May 11th, Ann Arbor, Michigan, May 12th, Cleveland, May 13th, Indianapolis, May 14th, Carrboro, North Carolina, May 18th, Abingdon, Virginia, May 19th, Charlottesville, May 20th, Asheville, North Carolina, May 21st, and Atlanta, May 22nd. Hope to see you guys out there. And now, without further ado, here's our show. To know Anais Mitchell, her voice, her style, and her presence, is to know one of our country's most vital and imaginative performing artists. Born in 1981 and raised in rural Addison County, Vermont, she grew up with a copy of the folk hymnal Rise Up Singing in the household. After high school, she cut her teeth for a year at Cambridge's legendary folk institution, Club Passim, before attending school at Vermont's Middlebury College. When Chicago's Waterbug Records released her sophomore album, Hymns for the Exiled, it caught the attention of one of Mitchell's longtime heroes, Ani DeFranco. She was signed to DeFranco's Righteous Babe record label based in Buffalo, New York, for whom she would record 2 full-length albums and an EP. In 2014, along with Jefferson Hamer, she earned a BBC Two Folk Award for her recording of Willie Winsbury and was invited to perform at Royal Albert Hall. Just this year, she was invited to the Lincoln Center in New York as a guest of their prestigious American Songbook series. When asked by the program, "What makes a song American?" she replied, "An American song relies on instinct more than anything else." Over the years, she's toured with DeFranco, Bon Iver, and the Punch Brothers. Lindsay Zolatz for Pitchfork once described her songs as never whimsical, sentimental, or light. Sex and death creep into her compositions as casually as they do real life. Stephen Holden for the New York Times declared that her songs address contemporary angst with uncanny vision. The Daily Telegraph and others have dubbed her the Queen of Modern Folk. Her own view of royalty, though, is a bit different. Once remarking on her childhood ambition to become a writer, "I always knew the word was king." Recently, she was in Austin on a tour called Use Your Voice, playing songs in the round with Patty Griffin and Sarah Watkins, and we swung by her hotel to have a chat. You used to live here in Austin, didn't you, for a little while? You had
that's funny. It was just 7 months of my life, and I was 21. I turned 21.
So this would have been around 2001 or 2002 you were here in town?
Exactly. Uh-huh. So I was going to college in Vermont, which is where I'm from. Mm-hmm. And I had this boyfriend who I'm now married to.
Yes.
Noah. Mm-hmm. And we were super in love. It was the beginning of our kind of love. And I think exactly what happened is that September 11th happened. So it was 2001. And I remember this day when I was in school, mm-hmm. and he had graduated but was visiting me at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to even like imagine that this is what it was like now. But do you remember there was talk after that had happened that there was like anthrax in the subway? There was a very like apocalyptic moment where yes. people were like, we might all die. You know, this might be the end of our
yes.
life. Mm-hmm. And that happened, and we were sort of like, we're in love, and what am I doing in this college? I want to be with you, and where should we go? And we decided to come to Austin. Partly because we had heard it was the music capital of the world or something, and mm-hmm. I had heard about the Kerrville Folk Festival for many years, and was a fan of Michelle Schacht, and like had heard those campfire tapes she had made mm-hmm. At the Kerrville Folk Festival. Do you know those? Have you heard those?
Well, I don't know Michelle Schacht's tapes from there, but I'm super familiar with Kerrville. I love that festival. I think it's such a piece of unique Americana.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing like it. It lasts for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Out there. So you had heard about the Kerrville Folk Festival before you came down?
Yeah, absolutely. I had heard about it because of this record that Michelle Schacht made at Kerrville.
She made it at Kerrville?
Yeah, it's just like somebody with some kind of recording device at a campfire, and you can like hear the sounds of the night. And she's just playing these amazing songs. And so I had heard about that, and we also, at the time, like, Noah had this job canvassing for an environmental organization.
PERG?
It wasn't a PERG. It was called Citizens Campaign for the Environment.
Okay.
And there was one on Long Island. There was like various ones in different cities, and one of them was Austin. And so he could have a job if we came to Austin.
I got you.
Going door to door for this environmental organization. And so we came, and we first we lived in this kind of shitty apartment complex that was east of I-35. It was like it was our first apartment, our first like shared apartment together. And then
that's so fun.
Yeah. We moved, then we sublet this sweet place in Hyde Park. So
Hyde Park is beautiful.
Yeah.
And were you so you weren't going to school down here, you were just working and playing?
Yeah.
That was kind of the vibe?
Yeah. I had sort of like, I also, before I went into college, had taken a year and moved to city of Boston, because I had heard mm-hmm. that was also a great sort of songwriter town.
Yes.
And so in these times, I would just waitress or take whatever job. There was plenty of jobs back then. You could take a job and quit, a few weeks later, and then try to like play open mics and stuff.
Yeah.
So I waitressed at this cocktail bar on 6th Street. That was it was very short-lived. It mm-hmm. Basically it opened right when I was moving to Austin, and then it folded as soon as I left. So I
think we can all see what the reason for that was.
It was called the Acoustic Cafe. You guys didn't live here then?
No. Yeah. We moved here in about 2010. It was a place called the Acoustic Cafe on 6th?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the idea was it was going to be like a listening room. And it was non-smoking before, like, everywhere was non-smoking. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time asking people to go outside with their cigarettes.
Wow.
Because it was like this one non-smoking bar. It wasn't very well run. There's this woman who was doing the booking, and I remember that one time a Joni Mitchell album ended up in her stack of demos to like listen to for people like trying to get gigs at the club, and she listened to it, and she would give a grade to all of the demos.
Submissions. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So she gave this one a C.
To the Joni Mitchell
Joni
album?
Mitchell record. I don't even know which one it was. It was like best of or something like that. And she wrote maybe on a Monday night. Maybe on a Monday night we'll get her in here. But I was waitressing, and then if somebody canceled or if someone was late, like they would let me get up there, take off my apron and get up there with my guitar and play some music.
Man.
So it was a formative time.
That's so, the way that you described that start there, it's really, and I don't know if it's still like this with music for people starting out, but it's so democratic, the way that you can just, like the fact that open mics, you got your start there, I got my start there, and now we both do this for a living, and it's, I didn't know anybody. It sounds like neither did you to get started, and I just love that.
Me too, and that, actually that's part of why Kerrville was so important for me at that. So because we moved down here, and I went to the festival, and then I kind of fell in love with it, and I went back several years in a row. I went for the whole 3 weeks, and you could volunteer there,
right,
doing whatever job, and it wasn't that hard. It was like a few hours of work, and you would get 2 free meals. And you would get 8 free beers. I remember this at one point.
Per day?
8 free beers a day.
That's a well thought out amount of beer.
Absolutely.
It's not too much, not too little though either. That's good.
Yeah, I mean it's for a 21-year-old too. It's plenty. For a gal. Anyway, but the thing about Kerrville was that you really it was democratic, like you're saying, like there's these campfires, and a lot of people going to the festival, they don't even know or care what's happening on the stage.
Right.
They're there for the camps, and they have a camp, and it's got a name, and it's been going for decades, and
wow,
and it's always in the same spot, and they have cultural, they have like traditions that are related to their camp, and the whole thing is like you show up with your guitar and you wait in the circle, and sometimes you wait for an hour or whatever, but finally like you get to play your song. And the folks at that festival, I think, are really like, they're listening for the song, and they can hear the song underneath whatever the performance is, whatever the wherever you're at in terms of your presence,
right.
They're there to hear, and they're listening for the great line, and when they hear it, there's an audible.
They emote, yeah.
Yeah, they emote.
That's great.
Yeah.
Like they just watched Allen Iverson do a crossover or something.
They say that again?
Like they watch LeBron James just stuff the ball or something.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what it's like, right.
There's a great story about that I actually heard from Joe Ely. He didn't tell it to me on the show that we did, but he said that when he did Kerrville Folk, when it first started, I believe the Flatlanders, his band, played it, and there was this guy in the front row, older dude, kind of heavy set, with kind of like longish gray hair. It was Lyndon Johnson. It was a post-presidential Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, man.
Who moved back to Texas, to the hill country. He had an immense amount of guilt about the escalation that he did in Vietnam.
Wow.
And in this weird, who knows, you'd have to get a Freudian analyst to figure out what this was, but he grew his hair long after the presidency.
Wow.
In some sort of identification with the counterculture groups that had been saying, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And Ely claimed, I hope I'm not putting Joe on blast here, but he claimed that Johnson came backstage afterwards and smoked a joint with everybody.
Wow.
So that's...
No kidding.
Even if that's apocryphal, I still love it,
I love that, and that's what I love about Kerrville and Austin and Texas, but especially this part of Texas, is there's this real mashup of, I call them emotional cowboys. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And you'll be like a cowboy, and he'll be talking about like a Reiki session that he was doing. But,
yes, Zen cowboys too. Like there's a whole thing. There's a whole ethos of the cowboy that's pretty similar to to some of those Zen ideas of emptiness and,
Yes.
and calmness and stillness and being where you are.
Absolutely.
And you got guys like Jimmy Dale Gilmore that are that,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think Marfa, Texas also really encapsulates that. as
Yes, I know. I know that that's true. I've never really hung out in Marfa, but
well. You got to go.
yeah.
You got to go.
Yeah, I've heard that.
We
Is it true that Scalia died in Marfa?
outside of Marfa. And what you have to understand about Marfa is it's so remote. Like you can't fly into you fly into El Paso and then drive for like 5 hours.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
who knows what he was doing out there. It involved robes and some sort of single barrel Jägermeister, I think.
Oh man. Yeah.
So you kind of grew up out of your folks were back to the Landers. Huh?
Yeah.
They went from California to Vermont. You're one of my favorite parts of doing some research on Anais Mitchell was coming across the dust jacket cover of your old man's book.
Oh yeah. Which one?
So your dad, Don Mitchell, he wrote a book called Thumb Tripping.
Yeah.
And on the dust jacket cover of the book, the advertisement,
Job, Joe, you did your research.
the advertisement says everything you need to know about the marijuana generation.
I know. Yeah. So, so my parents came from the East Coast. You know, they came up mostly in New Jersey, and they met in college. They went to Swarthmore College.
Okay. Yeah.
They hitchhiked to California for Summer of Love, I guess.
Yeah.
And they spent a fair amount of time, and they were in it. You know, they were doing it. Whatever it was that was going on, they were doing it.
Yeah.
And then at one point, it sort of the thing to do in that culture was to buy a piece of land in the middle of nowhere and raise your own food and things like that.
Grow your own, yeah.
Yeah, and my dad describes there was the Whole Earth catalog, and there was an advertisement about like going back to the land in Vermont, and that there was real estate or something, and so they decided to do that. But he started writing in college, and his first book, which I think wasn't Thumb Trip, it was another one called Four Stroke.
Four Stroke?
Yeah.
All right.
Which was about like a group marriage involving like car mechanics or something.
Okay.
I read all these books when I was quite young because it was my dad.
It's
You know,
your
I wanted
dad.
to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was quite an interesting writer, and but he also says that sort of he thinks he kind of lucked out culturally, speaking, that he. I think that the publishing company that ended up picking up these books of his, they had a chance to sign Jack Kerouac, and they had passed on it because they were like, "This isn't cool," or "This isn't what we do," or something. And then obviously that was a big mistake on their part.
Right.
And so my dad's books came along, and something about them like reminded them of that.
And they didn't want to miss twice.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so they grabbed him up, and he made Four Stroke. He made Thumb Tripping, which was an account of his sort of adventurous hitchhiking with my mom in his hippie days. And they made a movie out of Thumb Tripping.
I saw a little bit of this
Oh my
online,
goodness.
but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Who's in it? Who's in the movie?
Yeah, I should know.
I should have figured this out.
No. There's sort of a beautiful actress that was in a version of, I think, The Scarlet Letter, like the original film version of The Scarlet Letter. Does this ring a bell? These icy blue eyes and this like, I can't think of her name. We'll find out.
But she was the star of Thumb Tripping, the motion picture.
She was my mom, or the character based on my mom. And then he wrote some other novels, but he started, once they moved to Vermont, he started writing more. He was writing articles for Boston Magazine, and they were about farming and sort of being a urban intellectual that had moved to the sticks, and what his observations or whatever. And and then he started teaching, and all his writing took more of a sort of nonfiction memoir type of a turn. So those early books, but there's another book from those early days that made a big impression on me, which is called The Souls of Lambs.
And what made such an impression on you?
Yeah, it's a very beautiful, weird, simply written, kind of a parable. I actually wrote, like, one of the songs on Young Man in America is based on that book, this song called Shepherd. And so the beginning of the story is about this shepherd who, this modern day shepherd who, and my dad and my mom have had sheep since they were, this part of the going back to the land was they got this flock of sheep. So it was, imagery that was close to their hearts or whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't totally random. So this shepherd and his wife is pregnant, and there's this thing in the summertime with farming where if you want to bring in the hay crop, you have to have a certain number of days of fair weather. And if there's if it rains on your hay crop, then you would lose the crop.
Okay.
And so in this story, the farmer's wife is pregnant and she goes into labor, and he says, "Oh, let's go to the hospital." And she says, "No, it's okay. You can finish bringing in the hay first." And he does try to finish bringing in the hay crop, and then by the time he's finished, she actually has died in childbirth, and that's the beginning of this tale. And then the rest of the book is really this sort of this meditation, this reflection from this lonely shepherd character on living and dying and husbandry of animals and meat and stuff like that. It's very sort of an archetypal story, and it went deep for me at a young age.
Yeah. Well, there's no archetypal parables in any of Anais Mitchell songs. What music was available for you out there in rural Vermont? Were you getting radio stations? Were your folks buying you CDs or records? Or what were you hearing? What was going into your brain?
Well, the first thing was just my parents' record collection, and they were into a lot of like really lyric heavy songwriter stuff, like Joni Mitchell. They had all those records, and Bob Dylan, and
for them it was more than just on a Monday for Joni Mitchell. She could have played any night.
Yeah, any night of the week. She's welcome. And the jam would be like put on the record and then sing along every single word of the song.
Really?
Yeah.
As a family?
Well, my mom wouldn't really partake. My dad was into that, and my brother, who's 5 years older, was into that. And I was young enough to be sort of really impressed by the fact that they knew all these lyrics.
Oh, yeah.
And they would do that with Joni Mitchell. They would do that with, like, Velvet Underground. I can remember that.
Really?
Yeah. And what else? Dire Straits. My dad was way into Dire Straits.
Some of those early Dire Straits records are so good.
So good.
Yeah.
And the lyrics are so good. And I think there was always an appreciation in my family for like lyrics that were storytelling type of, like a lot of the Dire Straits stuff is story vibe.
It is. Yeah.
And he takes on the voice of different characters, and it's not just about him.
No, it is.
So that was the first stuff I heard. And also, I was a hippie child. And so there was plenty of, we had the Rise Up Singing songbook.
Yeah.
Learned to sing a lot of those songs and sort of old folk songs and Pete Seeger type stuff.
Wasn't that put out by like Sing Out? Or was it a different?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Peter and Annie Blood Patterson is what I remember. There's the curators of that collection, and it might have been Sing Out that actually did the publication.
Wow.
I was raised Quaker also, so there's a certain amount of...
You were raised Quaker?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah. Which in the Northeast is pretty vibey, open-ended sort of a scene. It's sort of like Unitarian, you know. There are different kinds of Quakers around the country, and some are more Christ-centered.
Right.
And in our Quaker meeting, there were Jewish Quakers and Buddhist Quakers, and so it was more about the mode of kind of silent worship and community. And there was a certain amount of like singing, not the most melodious as far as church groups go.
Right.
I think you can do better than New England Quakers, but the songs are great, and the
it's beautiful.
intention was there.
It's beautiful music. Was anything? Obviously, you have a lot of those folk influences at that time, though. Probably around the early '90s, there was a lot of kind of punk music making it to the mainstream, like Sonic Youth and Nirvana and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Were you listening to any of that?
Right. That was like the first stuff. So I came up with my parents' stuff, as everyone does, right? And then there's a moment where you start to, find your own way. And at first I was into like pop music. 95 XXX was the radio station. And I can remember, CNC Music Factory. So
oh wow,
maybe I think we're about the same age. I might have a couple years on you. I don't know.
No, we are. We're almost. I was 84, and and so your old man must have been pretty nonplussed about the CNC Music Factory era.
Yeah, they sort of just checked out, of my my musical tastes for a while.
I knew I was getting old when, always prided myself so much on being hip with it and getting it. And then the first time I heard a Skrillex song, I think I said out loud to my wife, "This isn't music." And that is the day that I knew I went from a boy to an old man.
Yeah.
In that moment.
That's right. That's so funny. It happens to the best. But Nirvana, right. I remember the first Nirvana records coming out, and those were some of the first few things I bought. I was sort of evolving from 95 XXX, and I remember the Nevermind album and Pearl Jam 10, which came out about that time. Those two albums were maybe the first couple albums that I bought.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't remember if I loved them. It just felt cool. It just felt like it was cool. And I needed to like dig into that.
Yeah.
I didn't really like feel like I had awakened until I got into a certain wave of female songwriters that happened in the 90s.
Who were?
Yeah, so Ani DeFranco was a huge one, really huge. Probably in my world, like the biggest, especially at that age. And also like Tori Amos was pretty important to me. And then Dar Williams, which sort of really got me. Certainly, Ani and Dar were sort of pointed away towards the coffee house, this sort of this folk world that was like we were talking about the folks at Kerrville or whatever that are there for the song. That a lot of those records are acoustic, the early ones anyway. It's all about the song, the singer, the self accompaniment, and not about the production value per se.
And not about necessarily doing what you deem to be the most commercially viable thing in that moment.
Right.
Kind of speaking to a truth. Although in the 90s, especially the mid-90s, that might have been a very commercially viable thing to do. Like there was a moment there.
Lilith Fair and stuff.
Yeah, there was a moment there where that bubbled up to kind of the consciousness of America gazed its eye on that for a moment. There was certainly a moment of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it even kind of swallowed in for a moment. Of course, you had people like Dar and Ani who were at the heart of it, but even for a moment, like I remember one of those Lilith fairs, they had like Jewel would come and do it. You know what I mean? So she is so obviously not part of that tradition at all, but like there was that moment where like, oh, well, Jewel's going to come play the Lilith Fair this year too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she had some songs that felt like they could have fit in that.
Yes.
She was just like way too commercially viable to like stick with that scene. But some of those songs were very coffee house type of songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of a path because that stuff, it does have that it's very focused on the singer and it just express like emotion and the expression and the storytelling and the like, especially with these women, like This is my experience. This is how I see the world. With Ani DeFranco, I think very connected to like slam poetry.
In a strange way, yes.
Yeah.
Huh?
But then it was like one next level of remove from folk music as it connects to the traditions. Do you know what I mean? The old school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like Killian Welch, when that came along, and that was a few years later for me.
Yes.
That was a real revelation because those songs felt like they could have been from any time.
That Killian Welch's contribution does, at least in this moment now, seem to have been, that was a direction that's been a little bit more durable as far as like musically, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But probably just because you're right, it just tacked a bit closer to the tradition, and there's a reason that something is a tradition.
Yeah.
You know, because it is durable.
And she did a great, I mean, she still does, just job of stitching together this really ancient archetypal stuff with language that feels modern.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one song that from that Time the Revelator record that was huge for me. That was a very huge album.
It's definitely in my Mount Rushmore for sure.
Yeah. That one, Ruination Day, where she's like, the iceberg hit, I don't know, the iceberg hit, they must have known, God moves on the water like Casey Jones. Mm-hmm. So I walked downtown on my telephone.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, how did you just say that word, you know? Yeah. And it was so, and it's great. It's validating for the present day, right? Yeah. To connect back in that way.
Well, and it's even funny now that you mentioned that, like, I guess when she wrote that in 2001, in a way, a telephone was like a very modern thing to put in a folk song. And how quaint does that seem now? I mean, we're sitting in a hotel room and I'm looking at a telephone.
Right.
And it looks like something out of another era now. You know, and she only wrote that, so it almost seems
like
to
a
fit.
Landline, like you never would see a landline.
Yeah, you never see a landline too much anymore. So in the same way that obviously she would have like a reference to a mule in a song or something like that, and that's so obviously anachronistic. Yes. Well, the telephone, it's almost like she predicted that becoming an anachronism too.
Yeah, but she walks downtown on it, so it's got to be a cell phone. Right.
Oh, okay, this is a good point.
Right, that's what I feel. But she didn't say, I walk downtown on my cell phone, which would be like what would happen in like a Nashville pop country song.
Right.
It's so interesting how long it takes for new words to become poetic,
to become elegant, yeah. Taking a bold, new creative direction looks great on paper. A visionary shift in direction seems obvious if you're describing it from a sectional couch in a Behind the Music documentary many years later. Intellectually, we understand that all great artists kept moving to stay alive. In the moment, though, if you're a working artist, that path is much foggier. People close to you might not hear it the same way. The label releasing your work might get cold feet about investing in an untested direction. Concertgoers might politely sit through a few of the new album songs, but usually they bought tickets to hear the old ones. In the long run, there's every reason to reinvent yourself. In the short run, there's every reason not to. In 2010, with a couple records under her belt and a growing audience, Mitchell took a left turn, writing and releasing an entire folk opera. Hadestown is based on the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. On the album version, she enlisted Ani DeFranco, Justin Vernon, and Greg Brown, among others, to embody the voices of different characters. It has since become one of her most celebrated works. And currently, it's reveling in a second life of its own, as it's being produced by the New York Theater Workshop and Obie Award-winning director Rachel Shavkin as a fully realized work for the stage. She took a leap of faith, and she landed on both feet. How did you know that Hadestown was it completely different? Why wasn't that just an Anais Mitchell record that followed The Brightness?
So Hadestown started out as this like DIY theater show in Vermont, and before that album came out, there were 2 drafts of it that were on the stage.
Yeah.
Although it was much more abstract than what ended up even on the album, and then what's happened since the album. So it was a very sort of a proto version of the show. But
even going back before that,
yeah.
Like when you started writing those songs, did you say, I'm writing songs and this feels like a different project, a different medium? Or did you say, I feel like putting together a theatrical piece and so I'm going to write songs for it?
Yeah, I know. I can't really remember. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
Like, I do know that a couple of song lyrics came to me when I was driving that just seemed to be about the Orpheus and Eurydice story, which was weird for me, but I thought, wow, it's a beautiful story. You know, that would be a beautiful story to tell. It was the lyrics of "Wait for Me," but they didn't end up on the album. They didn't end up in the song, but it was like, it was "Wait for me, I'm coming in my garters and pearls. With what melody did you barter me from the wicked underworld?" And it was almost just like a funny like word game when I was driving.
Yeah.
And but then it spoke to me in this way, and I thought I might want to tell that story. And I think part of it was what you're talking about, more of just like a desire to tell a longer form story. And I noticed that going to shows, and I love songs. I just love a 3.5-minute song. It's like my favorite thing in the world when it's great. And but even seeing a show of a songwriter that I really admire, like there's a certain moment in the show where I would be like, start to get antsy, you know, start to like look at my watch, and it's like there's something about the tension and release that happens so quickly, and then one after another.
I know.
And whereas a terrible movie, I would watch to the end. Watch it to the end because I gotta find out what's gonna happen at the end of this movie.
It's so true. No, that's actually, I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, why is it that I won't start to get antsy in a terrible movie? It's got like an hour for me before I start to get antsy, and then even with someone that you love, you watch them for like 15, 20 minutes. They start playing something off the new album, and you're checking your phone, you know what I mean? And you hate it when people do that to you, and yet you're doing it to someone else. I think actually maybe that analogy isn't completely right on, because there is when you go to see a movie, by definition, it's going to be something that you haven't seen before if you're going to see it in the theater and you want a new thing. But when I'm going to see an artist, usually I'm going to hear the songs that I like to hear, you know, and I know the songs, and like your dad and your brother in the kitchen, I'm singing along with the Velvet Underground. There's a different experience between really loving a show and really loving a movie, I feel like. It's
good to remember that, what you just said about people wanting to sing, wanting to hear what they know, and to be able to have that ritual like enacted live. Like that's the whole contract. Because when you're playing, I mean, I always feel like, oh God, they don't want to hear this song again, you know, because I play it every night. And it's like, oh God, I wish I had 5 new songs for them at this gig. And probably that's not the case. What I do like though is I want to feel like this night is different from all other nights, you know, in Passover speak or whatever, Hanukkah speak. I don't remember.
Yes, and even just finding that feeling, even if nothing physically different happens, I feel like if you're in a mindset where you think something different might happen, you have a different presence on stage. There's a different electricity.
Yeah. This tour I'm on with Patty and Sarah, we don't have a set list.
That's great.
Yeah, I never roll like that. It's very cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
you got
a supporting cast that you can pass the ball to, so that's great.
That's helpful. Yeah.
In this one. And I do want to talk about this tour, but before we leave Hadestown, I got to tell you, I really think that Why We Build the Wall is, I think the ultimate goal that any of us are trying to do right now, writing songs, is ironically to write a song so good that 50 to 100 years from now, no one knows who wrote it. You know what I mean? And it just says traditional next to the side of it.
Yeah.
And Anais, I got to tell you, I think that one has a shot, man.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
I really do. I was listening to it, a bunch of different versions this week, and I've always loved that song. And that song, I swear to God, that was written before you wrote it. It really, that's for me. That's your one. That and Coming Down. I feel like those two of
And
yours.
you know what's funny about, but probably not surprising about that song, Why We Build the Wall, is like, I'm a very slow and careful writer. Like I get an idea, and I'm not the kind of person who will like follow an idea all the way to the end unless I think it's good. Do you know what I mean? I won't just like write a song and then throw it away. Yeah. I wouldn't get that far. I'd write a little bit and be like, not feeling it, and not continue. And it takes me weeks, months, sometimes years. I'll be working on something, chipping away at it, trying to get it so it feels right. And that song just came out of the sky. Yeah. It just did. It was so fast. I didn't even know what it was or if it was good. Played it for my husband. He was like, "Oh, that's weird," and then it was the song I had to play every night. Yeah. After that.
Yeah, it's weird sometimes when you have a song like that comes so quick. When people tell you, they're like, "I really like that song of yours," I feel like I can genuinely be like, "Yeah, I like it too," because I feel at just as much of a remove as that person does from the song. Because I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't think about writing that song for 30 years, and then I wrote it for 15 minutes, and then I haven't thought about it since." You know? So, yeah. I mean,
or else, that's a good way of looking at it. Or else I feel like an impostor. Like, I didn't write that.
I didn't write it. I know.
Yeah.
And it's your subconscious, or whatever you want to call that. When neuroscientists discovered recently that like your brain is making decisions milliseconds now before we move somewhere or say something, or so that would just, writing a song like that would be that sort of determinism writ large, like, well, how much do we really have to do with any of it? And sure, you don't get any of the credit, but you also don't have to take any of the blame either.
Right.
A good thing.
That song gets weirder and weirder with the rise of Donald Trump. Like,
You did anticipate the Trump presidency with that one.
The weird thing is, and it's like, it's just that it's an archetype, right? And he is tapping into an archetype.
He is an amazing piece of art. He really understands. He's an artist in a way. Obviously, I hope it goes without saying for anyone who knows me or is listening to this. This thing. He's a villain in every sense, but you can be a villain and be an artist, and he really,
right. He's tapping into something.
He's tapping
powerful.
into something.
Yeah.
So I was listening to a couple versions of that song that you've done, and they were on YouTube. Never do this, but I scroll down. I see like the first YouTube comment on one of these is about Trump, and I scroll down, and I don't know which version of it that it was, but it's like all these comments that have been very recent, and it's all Trump. It's all Trump in this piece of art that you've created. You have no idea that this conversation is going on.
Right.
You have no idea that these people are listening to that song this time, and yet they're all in this medium having a very vitriolic conversation, but a conversation that kind of in a proxy way you're having with Trump and his values. Yeah.
Somebody said to me because since the Hadestown record came out, like I've been working further on it, and finally it's been 10 years, right, since I wrote that song. And finally there's going to be an off-Broadway production of the show.
Yes.
Starting May.
New York Theater Workshop?
Yes, New York Theater Workshop.
Awesome.
It's so exciting, and it's weird that this is coinciding with that. And some people have said to me, like, you know, hey, you think it's good for Hades? You think it's going to be good for ticket sales that Donald Trump is, like, doing so well? And I'm like, man, I think it would be better for everyone if he would go away.
Yeah.
Go away tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd like to sell a couple more hard tickets, but I'd also like my daughter to not grow up with a sociopath with the nuclear codes, you know? So the first time I heard you play, we were doing a bill together with Horse Feathers in Portland at the Aladdin Theater. And there, and every show I've seen you play since, up until we played together in Brooklyn 6 months ago, the people that come out to see your shows are so vocal and supportive and in it. They're right. You just have wonderful admirers. And what is your relationship with the people who love your music?
Yeah. I made this. The last record I made was this just a acoustic record that
XOA.
And I made that. Basically, I didn't put it out in the official sense. I didn't do a distribution thing or hire any publicity or anything. I really made it for people that were already. Fan is just such a terrible word.
Yeah, I hate it too.
Word, right?
But let's call it. Let's go back to the political. It's your base.
Yeah,
it's your base voters there.
I like it. I like that. Anyway, people that are already familiar with the music, and I sort of I wanted to make it because I think as a songwriter, well, I always have loved acoustic records. Like I was saying, those early Ani DeFranco records and Dar Williams records. And early Bob Dylan, any early records tend to be, you know, and I think a lot of times because there's not a lot of money, people are making the simplest document that they can, and that's just the voice and the guitar, and I always loved those albums, and then I would get like a little disappointed when somebody started to hit it big, and then they had a big produced record, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, like as soon as I could afford to have like a producer and bring some other musicians in, that's what I did.
Of course.
Because there's just another dimension that is possible when you do that. But I sort of thought to myself, if I were part of my base, I might like to hear some of those songs just the way that they were imagined in my bedroom or whatever.
That's great.
And so it was fun to re-record them with that in mind. And really, I mean, you know how it feels when you're playing for someone who gets what you're doing. I feel like in my world there's half and half. Sometimes I'm playing a show for people that are with me and they get it, and then sometimes you're playing, you know, for someone else's audience and you're trying to win them over without trying to win them over. And but it's a whole different feeling when people are already on board. It
is. There's a comfort level, and it's funny. You have those folks that are so supportive, and then when you put out, like, let's say you're going to do a project where you do a big push with it, so you record the album, you hire a publicist, you do the whole thing, and you're almost like putting your best foot forward for the world at large or something like that. But you feel like you're wearing like a tuxedo or a dress that's like a little bit too nice for you or something. And the people that are part of your base, they're still just like, yeah, man, go for it. You know? But at least myself, I've always felt goofy.
Right. I got to say, Joe, also, like, that show we did, I opened up a show for you at the Knitting Factory, the new Knit. Which I loved. I loved that night so much. It was like a night away from my 2.5 years.
I know. You and Noah ditched Ramona at the place. And,
But your show was just so moving. It was so moving. And I felt that same thing of seeing your crowd, watching you, room full of people that already knew and loved your songs and just wanted to hear them again. And you came out in the crowd and you played your hit, which from your early days. What's Him
101.
101. And it was just that. It was a seismic, you know, it rearranged the molecules in people's. It was a ritual that people. It was a ritual people wanted to have enacted, and you were able to enact it for them, and they all were part of that. Everyone was singing along, and just the power of those words strung together.
They're great people. Yeah, no. And they're great people that come out to their shows. And I know what you mean. Like, it's really fun. I feel like all the time playing music, we end up seeing each other a couple times a year, passing through a town or going to see a show. And it's really edifying to see your friends do their thing for their people.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And say, oh, yeah. Well, this is my friend who I'm friends with anyway, but they can also do this really idiosyncratic special thing that, you know.
It's different from seeing somebody at like a South by Southwest showcase.
Oh, that was just here. You just missed it.
I know. Although I have a memory of you. You can edit all this out if you're like embarrassed by it. But first time I saw you play was actually at a South by Southwest, and you were playing this shitty loud bar.
Oh, yeah.
And you unplugged your guitar and came out and you played Bury Me Far From My Uniform, completely acoustic, and people shut up, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was like win for the team, I felt like.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, won the battle, but may have lost the war.
Yeah.
How do you... No, here's where I want to go. Okay. I think sometimes as songwriters or just creative people in general, there can sometimes be, we can all harbor a fear that that thing, the muse, that spark, what we were talking about earlier, the same way that maybe neither one of us identifies with songs that people love the most because they came so quick. There can be a fear that that'll leave you. I know I have it. I think it stems from the fact that we didn't control that it came, and so we certainly can't control when it goes. We can edit this out if this is too personal, but I remember talking to you before you had your daughter, and you were sort of joking around, but I felt like you were kind of picking at a piece of fear you had yourself. You said, well, I'm getting ready to have my kiddo, so here I go. I'm going to lose my edge. Every woman that has a kid that does this type of music, they all say we lose our edge, so I'm going to lose my edge. Where do you think that fear stemmed from? And now that you've had a child, now that you've had your daughter, how do you interpret me reminding you of you saying that back in the day?
Yeah. I've done a lot of writing since Ramona was born, but it's all been working on Hadestown in the context of somebody telling me, we need you to work on, we need you to write a song that expresses such and such about such and such, or there's certainly has been a context, and I do feel like a lot of it, although I've sure tried to find the inspiration that can keep it from feeling like a calculated narrative,
Sure.
There at least has been a task that I had to rise to, and I haven't had a lot of time or inclination to really follow the muse wherever it wanted to go.
Sure.
Which I think is that's the heart of what we're all after, right?
It is. It is, but you can't just be doing that type of album every time. I think it's kind of brilliant on your part that you did. Last year you did the XOA album that was just. It's just being creative with parameters and look. The fact of the matter is, I'm not going to write an album like Nation of Heat every year. You're not going to write an album like Young Man in America every year. Those big, different direction statement things. I mean, I think you get a handful of them in a lifetime.
Yeah.
I really do.
Right.
And we have to figure out what to do in the meantime.
I know. Yeah. Well, I know the kid thing is, it is such a time I think the main thing, okay, so beyond the fuzzy brain, but just how it changes the nature of your time, your expense of time.
Sure.
If you have a kid, because if if you're raising a child with a partner, it's anything you want to do, any time you want to take for yourself is an ask in a way.
It's a zero-sum game.
It's
of time between years. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's what can you ask for? Like, I'd like to go to the gym for an hour. Can I do that? I'd like to go space out in my studio for 6 hours. Is that okay? Can you watch the kid while that happens?
Yeah.
It's really challenging to navigate that stuff. And I mean, luckily my partner's like great dad and very game to be like be in it and give me space to work, but I'm always aware, especially if you're in one household. We were living in rural Vermont for a long time when Ramona was just a little infant, and I would just go up to my bedroom and close the door, and he'd be downstairs with her, and she bumps her head on something and starts to cry. All of your energy is shooting out the door, down the stairs. And so it's really, I recommend if you can have a separate space.
Jamie and I live in about 800 square foot
same
place on the east side, so I don't know if that's going to happen,
right.
But it's all right.
Yeah.
If Ramona comes to you at age 18 and says she's going to follow in your footsteps professionally, what do you say to her? What's your advice?
Wow. I mean, of course, all I want for her is that she be happy, that she feel fulfilled, that she follow her dream. So, of course, I would encourage it. But it's not. I don't regret the choice, to go down the path we've gone down. Are you thinking? Are you thinking that there's this sort of sense that it would be better to have a more stable situation, or
no?
You're not even coming at it like that.
No, I certainly don't. Playing music has been being able to do this for a living. Sometimes I feel guilty about it because I think it's with all the serious stuff that goes on in the world. I do feel like. I do feel like I have kind of a frivolous job sometimes. That's definitely my main issue with it. But on balance, I do think it is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my whole life really has been leading to this, and I've always been, I suppose if I had a kid that was interested in doing it, like, it would just have to, I'd want them to be happy as well, too, but it would just have to be a kid where it's like, this makes sense for you. You've always been into this thing.
Right.
Otherwise.
Yeah. The crazy thing about music, the music industry right now, I think, is that I've been hanging out with a lot of actors lately because of working on Hadestown. And
the show,
I love actors. I just love that scene, that culture.
Yeah.
And it's like... I love the culture of them saying yes. They're given a role and they have to just give it their all, whether or not they believe in it.
Right.
Just go for it, and then and say yes in this way that I think in music we get more of a chance to say no to things.
I say no all the time.
I say no all the time.
Do this gig? No, definitely don't want to do that gig. No, good.
But the other thing is that they face rejection in this very head-on way, because they're going, and I've been on the other side of the desk at these auditions, and it's like, here comes this person, they're laying it on the line for you. This is who they are, and then you're going to say yes or no to them, and I think they have to get pretty zen pretty quickly, like being in that. They have to sort of either feel comfortable with themselves and like, this is what I do, and the jobs will come or not come, and it's meant to be, or else get out of the game because it would just be too hard,
Oh, yeah.
But in music, it's there is, of course, that same stuff at play and the rejection, but it just takes longer, right? It's like there's not somebody, like in that Coen Brothers movie with that young songwriter, and he goes to the industry guy, and he's like, what do you think? Here's my songs. And the industry guy is like, yeah, you should get a day job, right? But that doesn't really happen. In my experience, it's you might just not get a call back, or you just might not sell as many records as you were hoping, or you just might wake up one day and realize you don't have a retirement plan, and you're 50 years old, and it happens. gently, which may or may not be the kindest thing.
And that is exactly what I'm talking about, is that I think it is, you're right, like it happens gently on the surface, but that's actually brutal on a deeper level, because people can put a huge opportunity cost of their life, this one life that they're given, and it'd be really, in a way, it would be much better if someone did say, like, this is not going to work out for you, and put your talents somewhere else.
Right.
But I think, that in and of itself, seeing your life and who you are with as much clarity as possible and with as little delusion as possible is a life skill in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Seeing things for what they are. Mm-hmm. And that the older I get, that is like the one thing that I ask for in life. Like if I'm like looking up to the heavens for something, to ask for something, it's always just, please let me be seeing this as clearly as possible. I really hope that I'm seeing this situation as clearly as possible, you know?
Yeah. And I've had the experience of like going back and sort of reading a correspondence from years ago, say, and realizing that I wasn't seeing the full picture. Like,
fuck no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's entire like years of my life that I went in like a certain direction just based on like a patently incorrect assumption of what was going on, you know? And and that's fine. It's part of the learning process, but you hope that you do less of that in your life.
Yeah. One other thing just about what we were talking about, I was listening to this podcast just today as I was jogging around the river here in Austin, and it was about creativity, and this guy was defining creativity as something that was novel and also useful.
Okay.
And that usefulness was part of what made it valid, you know? And I think maybe you and I share that sort of sense of, well, is what we're doing valid in this world, right?
Yes.
We're not, you know, saving children's lives in the hospital, or, you know, working overseas for peace and justice, or all the things that we could be doing, and so is this valid? And I think that's a good sort of yardstick to keep on checking in with as a songwriter. Is like, is this song useful for people, or is it just me getting something off my chest? And
then walking around to people who do have useful jobs with a coffee can in your hand saying, "Can I have $1 for this?" You know what I mean? Like, that's like a frightening thing to think about. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the person that, you know, is giving something back.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Who's a non-musical hero of yours?
A non-musical hero.
That could be the name of our cover band, by the way.
Yeah, somebody else asked me this, and I don't want to like out myself. So I'm on this tour right now with Patty Griffin and Sarah Watkins, and it's a tour that's in league with the League of Women Voters, which is an amazing organization. They've been around since 1920 when women got the vote, and their whole mission is just get people to vote, you know.
And it's not just get women to vote. It's
everyone,
across the board,
right? And it's nonpartisan, and that's a big part of their mission. It's like, let's just protect voters' rights and make sure that they have as many resources as they can have to get them to the polls so that they can engage in the democracy. And it's so cool, and it feels like a really great time to be working with them. But what it means is that the tour is nonpartisan. So, you know, we're playing, it's like a Rock the Vote tour, but we're not talking about, you know, political candidates. I'll play Why We Build the Wall, but I'm not going to talk about Donald Trump. You know what I mean? And that feels great. It feels great to be supporting that mission, but it's hard sometimes because I come from Vermont, and I'm a big Bernie Sanders fan. I'm a big fan, and I have been for years. And he won Vermont by some ridiculous margin, every single town and city in Vermont. And I remember him from when I was a kid, like coming to my school, talking to kids in schools, talking about the cost of higher education way back then, you know, like the stuff he's been saying now, he's been saying for decades.
Right.
And I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of how far he's come, however it goes down, you know. And I feel like I'm going to, obviously, like if he doesn't take the nomination, I'm going to joyfully vote for Hillary and hopefully elect the first woman president. And that's awesome.
Yes.
But I'm just so proud of how far he's come with this message that he has, which is really would have been unthinkable in any other campaign.
Yeah.
So for me, at the moment, he's my non-musical hero. Although he did make a record. I don't know if you've heard it.
He made a folk record.
He made a folk record.
Yeah. He obviously sat across the table from someone, played the songs, and they said, "You need to get a day job, man."
Exactly.
He got out while the getting was good, and,
That's
and look
right.
what he's done.
Look where he is now.
It's great. Thank you.
Are we done? Did you really?
Thank
Did you get enough stuff?
We got plenty of stuff.
Really?
We got
sure?
all the stuff. That's our show for this month. If you enjoyed it, the best way to support is to write a brief review over in the iTunes store. It just takes a few moments, it's free, and it helps us out a great deal. The New York Theater Workshop will be performing Anais's Hadestown opera from May 6th to June 12th. By the time this episode airs, tickets might already be sold out for the entirety of the run, but go check anyway. This episode was engineered by Matt Schusler. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive microphone is not a song, a record deal is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.